Crossroad Connection. We're speaking out for those left unheard. My name is Alexa Winnick, and I am the managing editor here at Crossroad Bible Institute in the Center for Advanced Studies. Today I'm filling in for Dr. David Schuringa, the president of CBI and host of your program. We have in the studio with us today Anna Rapa, and she is a court-appointed lawyer in the city of Grand Rapids here. So welcome, Anna, to the program.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I know you're probably a pretty busy schedule with all the court appointments and all that. So we really appreciate you coming in. As I said, you are court-appointed lawyer. You graduated first in your class from the Thomas Cooley Law School, 2007? Yep. And you seem to be just involved with lots of different things here in the Grand Rapids area. I know you're recently at the CCDA conference that was held at Calvin College. Yep. We really appreciate you taking time to come in. There's a podcast that I've been listening to lately called On Being by Krista Tippett. I don't know if you've listened to it before, but she always starts off her interviews asking the people she's interviewing about their background in faith and what that looked like growing up. Was there a faith background? Was there not? And I thought before we start getting into some more questions about, your work as a lawyer, I would just love to hear about you and what your background of faith was growing up and how that plays into your choice of a vocation.
I did grow up in a Christian home. My dad was a pastor, and then when I was 13, we moved overseas to the mission field. My dad taught all over Southeast Asia, kind of at a seminary level. So instead of having people there come here and never return back to their countries, he went, and we were based in Singapore. And he traveled a lot all over to like Myanmar, which is also called Burma.
Right.
I think, Australia. He taught in the Philippines a lot. So he would travel, and we just kind of stayed there, and my mom helped run the office. So for my high school years, that's where I was.
In Singapore?
In Singapore,
okay.
Yep. And I think early on, as I was preparing to go overseas with my family, I really sensed a call in my own life to ministry and to reaching out to other people, whatever that looked like. And so definitely I came back and went to a Christian college, but I was always longing to be outside of the walls of Christianity also.
Yeah.
So I moved out. I worked at a maternity home as like a house parent or a building manager for a while, and then did urban ministry with at-risk youth for a couple of years, and then ultimately ended up going to law school. I think when I was doing the urban ministry, I just saw how many challenges my students had with so many different systems that they were up against, and it was overwhelming and I think many times discouraging. And so I decided at some point to be a part of hopefully changing the systems that they were dealing with, one system, which is the legal system.
Okay. I also noticed on your website, as I was doing a little bit of research on you beforehand, you mentioned one of the topics you like to discuss as a speaker is story as a response to barriers of faith. That really struck me, and I thought, I was an English major, so I love that idea of the power of narratives and how narratives the ones we choose to believe or the ones we reject really shape who we are as people. And I just was curious about if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Well, when I was working with youth, I came across a guy named Michael Novelli, and he had written a book and had a website called Echo the Story. And he had taken something like 26 stories from the Bible and was using them with his youth group and using them to teach and to get people engaged. And it struck me when I was reading it that he was on to something. So at the same time I came across this book, I was also discussing within my community of people in ministry with me about the different types of barriers to faith that I think people have. I think
what are some of those barriers?
Intellectual barriers would be one category. Things like God, creation versus evolution. That's kind of an intellectual question that has to be answered. Does God exist? Maybe as a philosophical question that has to be answered.
How people often bifurcate science and theology to be two different things.
Yep. And so sometimes people can't have faith because intellectually they can't understand or they can't defend the idea of faith. I think there are also spiritual barriers to faith, which are things like just my own desire to be in charge of my life. That is a spiritual barrier. I live in rebellion sometimes. And have to be willing to let go of that and to surrender my life to God in order to follow Christ. But I also think that there are emotional barriers to faith. So there are emotional reasons if I've been hurt by the church or by other Christians, or even I can't trust God because I have an abusive situation that I grew up in. I have emotional reasons why I can't follow Christ. And so I think stories actually sometimes help people move through those emotional barriers to faith, and sometimes the spiritual ones as well. A couple of years ago, I was meeting with a group of people in my house, and we just went through 7 stories of Christ's dialogues in Scripture. Okay. I ended up kind of writing a narrative based around that, which included some of the background. Like many times the stories of Scripture, if you read just the 10 verses that those stories are found in, you don't really have the context for what was happening.
For sure.
If you have no biblical background. So we started using those and just saw people amazingly respond to Christ's words as they began to understand what he was actually saying. So it was stories like the woman at the well and Nicodemus and things like that.
That, what you're saying really, I think, resonates with the work that we're doing here at Crossroad in some ways. We have over 45,000 students, and a lot of them will send us poetry or first-person testimony accounts. And for me, it's really interesting, especially for the poetry, to see how a lot of students use narrative or confession to kind of work through emotional situations that they're going through. And even in some of the artwork that our students will send, you'll see a lot of characters from Scripture popping up that seem to embody just what they're working through themselves. Like I think of the woman pouring oil on Jesus' feet and him not rejecting her. For all of us, whether you're in prison or not, we are storied creatures, and we really respond to that. And that's really interesting for a lawyer, I think, to have that perspective going into the cases. Before we go to the break, one thing I wanted to touch on was related to the emotional barriers that you're discussing about sometimes like the church getting in the way of that. And I'm interested to know, are you heartened by the church's, general response right now to social justice? Is it getting better? Is it, does it need improvement? Are you disheartened? Is the church getting in the way of that, or are we doing a good job at it? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's important for us as we live out our faith to think about the areas of social justice. One of the reasons that I'm a lawyer is because I believe God cares about justice. And that in pursuing that, I'm pursuing the heart of God. Is it the only thing God cares about? No, it's one piece of what God cares about. So I think that the church is doing better than it did when I was, say, 8 years old, as far as actually seeing that there's a balance between evangelism and outreach and social issues, because people need to be holistically whole. And the spiritual wholeness is an aspect of that as they learn to follow Christ.
Right. But and there's social justice as a part of that. Yeah. I've just been thinking about recently, and maybe part of this is to do with, some of the racial tensions that our country is going through right now, and the different responses from, Christian organizations or churches. But it struck me as interesting that there seems to be like a reluctance to speak out against some systems. And I know that's a very complicated issue, but I, like you, have grown up in a Christian subculture for most of my life, and I've noticed it in small things. Where even in churches or schools or ministries, kind of a reticence to break the peace, as it were, and how we often settle for a false peace instead of confronting systems of injustice in the small areas of our life. And I wonder if that bleeds out often into the church's perception of social justice. There's just one quote, and it was from your, I think the website of the Carter Alexander Institute, which we're going to talk about in the next segment. But it's a quote from Elie Wiesel, and it says, "I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. We must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere." Any thoughts on that quote before we head to the break? It's kind of a big one.
I mean, it is, and it came out of the time period when the Nazis were taking over the world, and people, God-fearing people, stood by and allowed it to happen. And I think it's a huge critique of Christianity, and as well as hopefully a motivation that truly silence honors the oppressor and not the victim. And there is a place to speak out for the victim, and I think it's most of the time that we should be.
Yeah. All right. Well, those are some great thoughts as we take a break here. So stay with us. There's more from Anna Rapa after we return.
Stay connected to what's happening at Crossroad Bible Institute with Crossroad Network News. This free magazine is designed to keep you informed and inspired about what Christ Church is doing in prisons and jails. If you'd like a free subscription to Crossroad Network News, fill out the form online by visiting us at cbi.fm.
Welcome back to Crossroad Connection. I'm Alexa Winnick, and I'm speaking today with Anna Rapa, who is a court-appointed lawyer in the city of Grand Rapids. So let's jump right in, Anna. Why don't you start talking a little bit about what your job is? I wonder if some of our viewers watching are wondering, what is a court-appointed lawyer? What do they do? What does that look like?
As a court-appointed attorney, I get appointed by a court to represent someone who, generally speaking, doesn't have enough money to represent themselves. I do take individual clients as well, but most of my clients are court-appointed, and I kind of do that on purpose. As I was thinking about what I wanted to do with my legal career, I was concerned with the just vast inequity that happens between people who have money and people who don't. And I can give you an example of that with ideas like bond. Okay, if somebody wants to bond out of jail, someone who's wealthy or has home ownership can put up their home against their failure to appear. Someone who has no property doesn't have that to do. So if their bond is $250,000, even if it's a 10% bond, that's $2,500, which they don't have. And
so what happens?
Many times they get stuck in jail and they can't get out. So you see a lot of injustice happening when people take pleas to things that they didn't do just because it's the only way to get out of jail. If the potential penalty is fairly small, sometimes people are just like, I have to get out of here. I have to provide for my family. So another type of injustice happens when court-appointed attorneys are overworked and aren't able to give the amount of time and energy to a case that they should.
That is a huge problem right now, I think.
And in much of Michigan, it's a very large problem.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about Michigan's current state of indigent defense?
Sure. I know that there has been, even the governor has been doing some investigation about how it's set up, because each county is given the responsibility to make sure their indigent people have criminal defense, but they don't necessarily have money coming in from the state. So a poorer county is going to be able to pay attorneys less money. Even Kent County, which is where I practice, it's not cost effective to be a court-appointed attorney. And there's a lot of, I get paid the same amount if I go to trial or if I plead my client out. And so if I were money motivated, I would have a high incentive to have my clients plead versus going to trial.
And I've heard cases about people that have, meet with their client 30 minutes before, just because it's, they're so overworked. And I think I read somewhere that Michigan is 44th out of 50 states in 2008 anyway, in terms of the funding that they give to indigent defense. And Dr. Scheringa, who's the president of Crossroad, he's actually on Governor Snyder's commission that's investigating that and working on that right now. So indigent defense is really on our radar as well, since many of our our students experience
Yeah.
the inequity there. When you're working with clients who are perhaps below the poverty line, how do you provide like personalized care for them? I noticed that was one of the things you know your law firm seeks to do. So what does that look like?
Well, I intentionally limit the amount of cases that I have so that I have time. So again, if I were out to only make money, I would be stacking tons more cases than I have and be taking a lot of independent clients in order to pay the bills. But instead, I work out of a very small office, and I make cost-effective decisions. I live in an older neighborhood so that I don't have the pressure of making a ton of money, so that I'm able to give that time. Again, if you were a corporation that was put together, an LLC or something like that, and your motivation is profit, like the way that I practice law is probably not possible or feasible in that situation.
Sure. How does that play into the Carter Alexander Institute for Justice? You're the executive director?
Yeah, it's a very small nonprofit, which I started actually when I was in law school, looking for just ways to join people together in talking about and affecting issues of injustice. So we do kind of 3 different types of things: education for the community, pilot programs that we think might have a chance of working, and then research and writing. So we have done things in each of those spectrums. We ran the Kent County Teen Court for a couple of years before turning it over to the Dispute Resolution Center.
What is that?
It's basically an alternative to the regular court system for juvenile offenders. Usually they were first-time offenders, but we would do education in the schools and then bring a jury from the schools, and they would be the jury. And the jury in that case actually decided it wasn't really a sentence, but what the sentence was. So did they have to write an apology letter to the person that they harmed? They had to come to classes that were called street law classes, which were evidence-based curriculum about just kind of changing their mindset about crime and who crime was harming.
It was affecting, and putting the victim and the perpetrator in a relationship together. That's a restorative justice model.
Yep. And we saw really good outcomes with not only the students who were being who had to come because they did something wrong, but also the jurors. I think it had a deterrent effect as they really thought about what happens when you commit a crime.
Sure. Okay. Moving on a little bit here, I want to talk a little bit about what you spoke on at the CCDA conference, which was just held here in West Michigan. I think the title was "The Client's Needs and Opportunities in the Criminal Justice System." What are some of these client needs that you experience?
Well, and as an attorney, I'm really just observing what my clients probably need or could use. So I think I put them in kind of different categories. I think my clients have needs for emotional support. Many of them, especially the repeat offenders, have actually pretty much burned the bridges with their family and friends. And so even if they desire to make different choices in the future, they don't have a support system to do that. They're great needs for people to have just like genuine societal relationships with other people that they don't have. I think one of the greatest needs that I see for many of my clients is just life skills training, including anger management. A lot of crime happens because people have, they have emotions that they don't know how to deal with.
Or articulate.
Or situations that they don't know how to deal with. And so giving people the ability to learn how to show up on time for court.
Right.
I mean, they just don't know how to do that. And sometimes it's like pulling teeth to get them to come.
But if it hasn't been modeled for them before, or it's a system, that they're stuck in, those seemingly small things are not small things,
Right. So things like that, that's another kind of need that I think they have. They definitely have spiritual needs for people to invest in them. When I go into the prisons, and I do occasionally to teach a class, I just look around me and say, like, these are human beings made in the image of God, and their lives are being wasted. They do have things they can contribute to society imperfectly sometimes, but we all contribute imperfectly.
Yes. Yeah.
So I just think like we are doing something really, really wrong with the mass incarceration that we have here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you just said summed it up really well. These are humans made in the image of God that do have something to contribute.
Yeah.
It's not that we're, looking to say, hey, we're doing you a favor, by helping you. It's like, no, we want you to be part as a contributing member of society. So, all right, we're going to take a break right now, but stay with us. There's more to come after the break.
At Crossroad Bible Institute, we are committed to helping people in prison develop relationships with Jesus Christ. By correcting Bible study lessons and writing letters of encouragement, CBI instructors participate in this ministry in a safe and secure way. For more information or to sign up to become a CBI instructor, please visit us at cbi.fm on the web.
Welcome back to Crossroad Connection. We are finishing up here with Anna Rapa. We've been having a great conversation about the status of indigent defense here in Michigan and other places, and what Anna is doing as a court-appointed lawyer to meet the needs of her clients. We talked about some of the soft skills that some of these clients need, the emotional needs, the spiritual needs. What do you see is the key need you help fill as a lawyer? Because obviously it's limited. You can't do everything.
Right.
Where do you see your role in that?
I mean, I think my role is to protect their constitutional rights and really to help them navigate the system. The system is overwhelming, and it is many times inhumane or dehumanizing. And so I am a human being, and I am able to treat them as human beings, which it adds to the sense that they're being heard. And I think that's one of the most important things for my clients, is to give them the opportunity to feel like they have had their story told, even if they are probably going to lose the case. Many times it's just important for them to have the opportunity to tell the story.
Sure, and not feel like a number just being funneled through the system, which goes back to what you said in our first segment about story and the importance of narrative and who we are. So obviously we've been talking about a lot of the inequalities, indigent defense, that needs improvement. Are there reforms happening right now, or reforms you've been a part of in the criminal justice system?
I wish there were more.
Okay.
I think there is investigation happening, and Michigan is not, high on the list of people who are taking care of indigent clients. And I will say that, I described the last segment about how I run my practice and how much it costs me personally to do law this way. I think that's one of the tragedies of our legal system, actually, because it shouldn't have to be a choice between, I don't know, should I have to be making all of those personal sacrifices in order for them to get the kind of representation that they deserve?
Right.
Why can't a lawyer be fairly compensated for doing a good job for a person who is poor?
Right. And that's relying on a lot of altruism on the part of the lawyers, which, for a woman of faith, that does have an integration to your life, but that's not the case for everyone. Sometimes convincing people for criminal justice reform does not end on the altruism or does not come from an altruistic or desire to really help our neighbors, but more from a practical standpoint of how does this benefit me? And that's unfortunate, but I think that's the reality we live in. What are do you know of any practical reasons to push for indigent defense reform, or how does that affect our communities? That's probably a big question.
Well, it is, and I can think of two major things right off the bat. First of all, the cost of incarceration. It's probably somewhere between $35,000 and $50,000 a year for each inmate. That's like paying someone a middle-class income or a college education when they break the law. This just seems really stupid to me. Financially, as a taxpayer, it's not helping anyone. And the reality is people get out of prison. So you send them away for a year, 2 years, 5 years, but then they come back. And when they come back, they're not in a better position. They're not like they haven't been given any skills.
And the cycle continues.
Right.
and-
It's just
yeah.
terrible. And I think the other thing has come out of my reading on mass incarceration, the problems with that. We are truly creating like an absence of these people in their cultures, in their home culture. So it damages their families. It damages their abilities to relate to the community at all. And I think just like we tend to look at crime and punishment as an individual thing. We're going to, this individual broke the law, so we're going to punish the individual by taking them out of the community. But we don't think about all the collateral consequences that happen, like the children who don't have parents, and the fact that they might have a single parent earner income or a single parent income rather than two. So now they're living in poverty.
Right.
And that damages society, because those people who come up in those circumstances don't have as much to give to the community. They don't have the skills that they need to have. And it truly does damage our entire communities when we treat criminals this way.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very scriptural concept, that our actions have a collective effect. It's not just about us. So to end off our time here today, what does the church need to do better at with these inequalities we've been discussing? Is there anything that can be done? How are you working with the church in your own experiences?
Well, I think one thing that we can do is just build relationships with people who have been in jail or prison or are coming out. There's definitely a time when people leave incarceration that they need a bridge into society. And the church really, truly can be a place that is safe for people to come. I think, unfortunately, sometimes we as the church are in a position where we're like, we don't want them anywhere near our children. We're more concerned about our own safety than with
comfort zones.
Than with seeing God's redemption and restoration happen. So if we become truly agents of God's reconciliation, like Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians 5, we will have a different perspective. So I know there are ministries where you can write to prisoners or correct Bible studies or sometimes go into prisons.
Crossroads, one of those,
Right. So like those are great ideas as far as building relationships with actual human beings, because I think as we begin to humanize the people that we have sent away to prison, then we're going to be motivated to see things change.
Yes.
And everything else kind of flows out of that.
Yes. And again, that goes back to knowing people's stories,
right,
and who they are.
Yep. But I also think legislative advocacy, but you have to buy into the idea that reform needs to happen. And I'm not sure you can buy in until you have those personal relationships. But we definitely need advocates. In the federal system, which I also practice there, they just reduced the guidelines for offenses, the sentencing guidelines for all drug offenses across the board, -2, which is a significant outcome that happened legislatively, and we need more things like that. I think they're talking now about smarter sentencing types of things, and I think if we could agree on what smarter sentencing was, that would be a great thing.
Yes.
But we do need to do smarter sentencing.
Okay. Well, I feel like we're just kind of scratching the surface of all these things. They're very important for, our country, for our state, but for our church, as well. This affects all of us, as you said. So thank you for coming in today and for touching on these important issues. I'm sure we could probably keep talking. But it's really great to have you, Anna, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of Crossroad Connection. We hope to see you again right here next week.